There's a moment, quiet, easy to miss, when something inside you shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a feeling, almost like a whisper, that the life you've been living and the life you were meant to live are two different things. You've felt it before, maybe late at night, when the noise around you finally stops and you're left alone with the one voice you spend most of your day avoiding, your own, and in that silence, a question forms. Not a philosophical question, something sharper, more personal, something like, who am I when no one is watching? Most people never answer that question, not because they can't, but because they were never taught it was safe to ask. You were handed a version of yourself early on, a role, a shape, an identity built not from the inside out, but from the outside in, built from what was acceptable, what was praised, what kept the peace, and for a long time, you wore it well. Maybe you still do, but somewhere beneath the performance, beneath the carefully constructed version of you that the world sees, there's a person who hasn't been fully heard, a person who is tired of shrinking. Carl Rogers, one of the most quietly revolutionary minds in the history of psychology, spent his life trying to understand one thing: why so many people feel like strangers inside their own lives. Not broken, not damaged, just lost. Lost not in a world, but in themselves. He called it incongruence, this split between who you actually are and who you've been told you need to be. And the longer that split goes unaddressed, the heavier it becomes. You feel it as exhaustion, as restlessness, as that hollow sense that something is missing, even when on paper, everything is fine. If that resonates with you, stay with this. What you're feeling isn't failure, it's a signal. It means something alive in you is still trying to reach the surface. Rogers believed that human beings carry within them a natural drive toward growth, toward wholeness. He called it the actualizing tendency, not a theory, but something closer to a biological fact of being human. Like a seed pushing through concrete, like lungs that want air. You don't have to earn that drive. You were born with it. But here's what blocks it, and this is the part most people aren't told. It gets blocked by conditions. Early in life, you learned that love wasn't unconditional, that approval had requirements, that certain parts of you, the loud parts, the sad parts, the inconvenient parts, made people uncomfortable. So you learned to hide them. You became skilled at monitoring yourself, at editing yourself before you even spoke, at asking, before every authentic impulse, will this be okay? And slowly, without realizing it, you built a self-concept that wasn't really yours, a curated version, sanitized, acceptable, but also hollow. If you've ever looked in the mirror and felt like you were looking at a stranger, this is why. If you've ever been in a room full of people and felt completely alone, this is why. If you've ever achieved something you were supposed to want and felt nothing, this is why. The gap between who you are and who you've been performing is the source of almost every quiet pain you can't quite explain. And most people spend their entire lives trying to solve that pain with more performance, more achievement, more approval, more noise. But you can't fill an internal void with external things. You've already tried. You already know this. So what does it actually take to come home to yourself? Not a technique, not a system, not a list of steps. Something older, something harder, something Rogers called the fully functioning person. Not a destination, but a direction. A person who is genuinely themselves isn't someone who has it all figured out. They're someone who has stopped pretending they do. They're someone who has learned, slowly, imperfectly, to trust their own inner experience, to value their own feelings not as problems to be solved, but as information to be heard. This is the part that's quietly terrifying, because if you start listening to yourself, really listening, you might hear things that complicate the life you've built. You might realize that the relationship you're staying in isn't love, it's familiarity. You might realize that the career you've been grinding for doesn't belong to you. It belongs to a version of success someone else handed you when you were too young to push back. You might realize that the person everyone thinks you are and the person you actually are have been living separate lives for years. That realization is not comfortable, but it is real. And for the first time in a long time, real might be exactly what you need. Think about the last time you felt genuinely alive, not happy in the way you're supposed to perform happiness, but truly, quietly, undeniably present. Maybe it was a moment of unexpected stillness, a conversation that went somewhere neither person planned, a morning when you woke up and, for a few seconds before your thoughts rushed in, you simply existed without judgment. Those moments aren't accidents. They're glimpses of who you actually are beneath the construction. And the fact that they feel rare, the fact that genuine presence has become something you stumble into rather than something you live inside, that tells you something important. It tells you how far the performance has traveled from the truth. Rogers observed something fascinating about the people he sat with in therapy. He noticed that when someone finally felt safe enough to stop managing their image, when the pressure to be acceptable was lifted even for just 1 hour, something unexpected happened. They didn't fall apart. They became more themselves. Not wilder, not more chaotic, more coherent, more real. Like a photograph coming into focus for the first time. And the feeling they described wasn't freedom in the loud, triumphant sense. It was quieter than that. It felt like relief. Like putting down a weight they had been carrying so long they forgot it wasn't part of their body. You know that weight. You've been carrying something too. Maybe it's the version of you that was built to make a specific person proud, a parent, a partner, a community, someone whose love felt conditional even if they never said so out loud. Maybe it's a narrative you inherited, a story about who people like you become, what people like you deserve, how far people like you are allowed to go. Those stories run deeper than we admit. They become the architecture of our inner life without our permission. And the dangerous thing about an inherited story is that it feels like your own voice. It doesn't sound like someone else's fear. It sounds like your common sense. It sounds like realism, like maturity, like knowing your place. But what if it isn't wisdom at all? What if it's just an old wound trying to protect you from a pain that no longer exists in the way it once did? If this is landing somewhere tender in you, if you feel something shifting, that's not weakness. That is the beginning of clarity. If you find yourself coming back to videos like this one, searching, reflecting, trying to make sense of the distance between who you are and who you feel you could be, subscribe to this channel. What we do here is exactly this. We go into the places most people avoid, and we don't pretend the answers are simple. There's a particular kind of loneliness that no one talks about enough. It's not the loneliness of being without people. It's the loneliness of being with people and still feeling unseen, of having relationships, conversations, even intimacy, and still sensing that the person being received isn't quite you, that what people love, what people respond to, what people rely on, is a version of you that you've been carefully maintaining for so long that you can barely remember what existed before it. This is the loneliness Rogers was pointing to, the loneliness of incongruence. And the remedy isn't to find better people, though that sometimes helps. The remedy begins internally. It begins with the willingness to be honest about what you actually feel, want, and need, not what you're supposed to feel, want, and need. That sounds simple. It is not, because for many of us, the act of acknowledging our own inner experience, our actual desires, our genuine fears, our real reactions, has been quietly trained out of us. We learn to override our instincts with social calculations. We learn to translate our true feelings into more palatable versions before speaking them. We learn to second-guess our own reality, and at some point, that second-guessing became so automatic that we lost track of what the first guess even was. We lost access to our own interiority. That loss is not a character flaw. It is an adaptation, a survival mechanism that was once intelligent and necessary. But adaptations that outlive their usefulness become cages, and you are standing at the door of yours right now. Not forced, never forced. Rogers was insistent about this, that genuine growth cannot be pushed, coerced, or engineered from the outside. It can only be invited. You have to choose to walk through. And the choice isn't dramatic. It doesn't require burning your life down. It begins with something almost embarrassingly small. It begins with noticing. Just noticing, without judgment, without agenda, without immediately trying to fix or explain or justify. What do I actually feel right now? Not what should I feel. Not what would be appropriate to feel. Not what would make the most sense given everything I know about my life. What do I feel? That question, practiced consistently, is quietly radical, because most of us have spent years living at a distance from our own experience, analyzing it, managing it, packaging it for consumption, but rarely just feeling it. Rogers wrote that the curious paradox of human growth is this: when I accept myself exactly as I am, then I can change. Read that again. Sit with it. Not when I fix myself, not when I become better, not when I've earned the right to be at peace. When I accept myself as I am, right now, in this moment, with all the contradiction and incompleteness and unresolved tension, that is when real movement becomes possible. Because self-rejection doesn't produce growth, it produces performance. And you've been performing long enough. The version of you that is exhausted, that feels like it's constantly running a race it didn't sign up for, that feels vaguely guilty for wanting something more without being able to name what that something is. That version is not your problem. That version is your messenger. It's telling you that the life you're living is too small for who you actually are. Not too small in terms of success or achievement. Small in terms of authenticity. Small in the sense that you've been fitting yourself into a shape that was never designed for you, and your soul has been quietly suffocating inside it. There is a version of your life that is wider, more honest, more congruent with who you actually are at the core. Not perfect, not painless, not free of difficulty, but real. A life where the person you show up as on Tuesday morning is recognizably the same person who exists in your most private, unguarded moments. A life where you don't have to remember which version of yourself you're currently performing. A life where being seen doesn't feel threatening, because what people see is actually you. That life is not a fantasy reserved for people who had better childhoods or easier circumstances. It is available to anyone willing to do the slow, honest, sometimes uncomfortable work of returning to themselves. And that work doesn't require a therapist, though therapy can be a profound gift. It doesn't require a dramatic life change, though sometimes life changes emerge naturally from it. It requires something simpler and harder than either of those things. It requires your attention, your honest attention, turned inward, without flinching. And here is the thing about attention that nobody warns you about. When you finally turn it toward yourself, genuinely, without agenda, what you find is not the monster you feared. It's not the chaos you were bracing for. What you find, underneath all the noise and the performance and the years of careful self-management, is something surprisingly tender. Something that has been waiting, not with resentment, with patience, with the kind of quiet endurance that only something essential can sustain. That tenderness is not fragility. It is the most durable part of you. It is the part that survived everything you went through by going inward, rather than disappearing entirely. And it has been holding the truest version of you in safekeeping, waiting for the moment you decided you were ready to come back for it. You don't have to be ready all at once. Readiness isn't a switch you flip. It's a direction you choose again and again, in small and ordinary moments. It's the choice to pause before you answer on autopilot. It's the choice to notice what you actually feel instead of immediately deciding what to do with it. It's the choice to stop treating your inner life like an inconvenience and start treating it like the source of everything meaningful you will ever build. That shift doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with clarity and fanfare. It happens quietly, the way light changes in a room when clouds move. And one day you realize the room feels different, not because anything outside changed, but because you stopped looking away. If something you've heard today has opened a door inside you, even just a crack, don't close it. Leave it open. Sit with the light coming through. You don't have to walk through it all at once. And if you want to share what's been moving in you, a thought, a recognition, a moment from your own story that this touched, leave it in the comments. Those words matter, not just to me, to the person scrolling who is trying to feel less alone in their own experience of this. Like this video if it reached something real. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. We have so much more to explore together. Rogers wrote about something he called openness to experience. Not optimism, not positivity, openness. The willingness to feel what is actually present rather than what you've decided should be present. The willingness to revise your understanding of yourself as new information, new feeling, new insight, new honest recognition comes in. This is the opposite of the rigid self-concept, the armored identity, the person who knows exactly who they are because they've been performing the same version for 20 years. Openness means staying curious about yourself, staying willing to be surprised, staying humble enough to admit that the story you've been telling about who you are might be missing something important. And here's what openness gives you in return. It gives you contact, real contact with your own life, not the managed, curated experience of a life observed from behind glass. The felt sense of actually being here, present, engaged, alive in the texture of ordinary moments, the warmth of a specific afternoon, the particular quality of a conversation that actually landed, the feeling of doing something because you genuinely want to, not because it checks a box on someone else's checklist. That aliveness is not reserved for extraordinary moments. It's available in the ordinary ones, but only if you're actually there to meet it. And you can only be there if you've stopped spending your inner life somewhere else. In the future you're anxious about. In the past you keep revising. In the performance of a present you're not fully inhabiting. This is what Rogers pointed toward with his entire life's work. Not happiness in the shallow sense, but aliveness, the full, present, honest experience of being a human being in this particular body, in this particular moment, with this particular history and these particular longings. All of it, not just the parts you've deemed acceptable. All of it. You didn't find this video by accident. Something in you knew it needed to hear this. Something in you is still oriented toward the truth of who you are, even after all the years of navigating away from it. That orientation is not a mistake. It is the most intelligent thing about you. Follow it, not with urgency, not with the pressure of someone who has been asleep and is suddenly panicking about lost time. With gentleness, with the patience of someone who understands that becoming yourself is not a project with a deadline. It is the longest and most worthwhile journey of your life, and you have already taken the first step. You're here, you're listening. Your time is now, not tomorrow, not when you've fixed everything, not when you've finally become the person you think you're supposed to be. Now. Exactly as you are, searching, uncertain, imperfect, and alive. That's enough. That has always been enough. And somewhere, in the deepest and most honest part of you, you already know that.